Alright guys, welcome back. Video number 2. I'm hopefully going to try to keep this within 10 minutes like before. So continuing on, we just ended by talking about the Soviet Union pulling out of Afghanistan. So in between that time, Afghanistan held an election. They put in a new democratic government, and it lasted for about 3 years until it fell apart in 1992. Between 1992 and 1994, it was pretty chaotic, and there was a lot of different leaders, people being assassinated, coups, and things like that. And in 1995, we see the rise of a group called the Taliban. Now, the Taliban is important to understand where they came from. So think back to our last lesson about a lot of Afghans becoming refugees because they didn't want to live under the Soviet-Afghan war. They didn't want to deal with the Mujahideen versus the Soviets. And so over 6 million Afghans actually left Afghanistan during that time. And most of them went over the borders. Like I said, we set up refugee camps just over the borders in Pakistan so that they could escape the war and then they could go back home when the war was over. So a lot of the people who were in those refugee camps, while they were there, they were being educated by extreme Islam. They were teaching them kind of a literal interpretation of the Quran. So they were teaching them what we would see as like extreme Islam. And their goal was, when they came back over the border into Afghanistan, is that they would fight at all, till the end in order to instill an extremist Islamic government. They wanted what was called Sharia law. And again, that's a literal interpretation of the Quran, where women were to not be seen and they couldn't be educated or out without men. Men had to wear a certain type of dress. They couldn't shave their beards, and everyone had to change their names to Islamic names. So in 1995, those people, as well as the remnants of the Mujahideen, you have to remember they were trained and armed by the United States, as well as a group called Al-Qaeda, and they were the most extreme of these groups that wanted this strong Islamic government. We saw a whole rise of this. 1995, the Taliban takes over the capital city of Kabul. They shell the city, killing tons of people, and they literally put in Sharia law. So if you're seen outside and you're breaking the law, they would just kill you on the spot. It was a very harsh and terrible time. If you've ever read the book The Kite Runner or seen the movie, that's what that scene is about, or the whole story is about. They lived in this free, kind of westernized, secular Kabul, and then when the Taliban came in, everything changed. Absolutely everything changed. So that was from 1996 until about 2001. There still was a government in place at this point who was trying to fight against the Taliban, but was just having a hard time because the Taliban wasn't just a few people. It was a ton of people, and it was an idea. So in 2001, the official government of Afghanistan reached out to the United Nations and said, hey, we would like your help in pushing the Taliban back over the border to Pakistan. However, in that same year, 2001, Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, carried out the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York City. That was an extreme tipping point. I would like you now, if you can, pause this video, go to the PowerPoint, watch President George Bush's speech about declaring the war on terrorism, because that's a huge moment in our history, and the policy changed how we approach and enter other countries. And it's a really moving thing. I know most of you weren't alive at that point, but I remember sitting down and watching this on the television, and everything did change after that. So I think that is an important little piece, but come back when you're done. So after 2001, after the terrorist attacks in 2001, we told the Taliban, hand over Osama bin Laden, or we were going to enter Afghanistan and we will take him from you and we will destroy the Taliban. And the Taliban refused to give over Osama bin Laden. And while they didn't necessarily want to take total responsibility for 9/11, they didn't necessarily want to give up one of their main leaders as well. So the United States goes in. This is called Operation Enduring Freedom, and it's the United States as well as the UK, and then the Northern Alliance or the Northern Front, and we were all fighting together against the Taliban, who would not hand over Osama bin Laden. We bombed them, we used cruise missiles, and in the end, we were successful in pushing them back over the border to Pakistan. From there, our goal, as usual, is to set up a democratic government, which we've done. It hasn't been perfect. So between then and 2009, they've kind of had these democratic elections. How fair they were, I can't really attest for that. However, in 2009, we see kind of a resurgence that's kind of similar to the Taliban. And during this whole time, the Northern Alliance, while we were trying to push the Taliban back over the border, we're also, saying if you are willing to negotiate and work with us, the Northern Alliance was offering them a place in the government. So kind of like we have a couple different house groups in the government, they wanted the Taliban to be in the government as well and have a say and be like an official group instead of kind of like this radical terrorist group. So, but every time the Taliban said, no, we're not negotiating. It's either an extremist state, Islamic State, or it's nothing. So that's kind of where that is at. In 2010, 2011, they just keep trying to have talks with the Taliban. Underneath the Taliban, we now see the creation of the group that you're all familiar with. I can draw it here. Okay. So underneath all of this, we see another extremist group pop up, and that is ISIS today. So it stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And it was actually Taliban groups that were pushed not only down to Pakistan, but across into Iran as well. So this is how it's all connected. And I think probably just the most important thing that I want you guys to take from this is something that you'll truly have to think about yourself, and I don't really have a good answer for, but when we as Americans think of the Middle East, we think of violence, we think of conflict usually. When we think of terrorism, we think of the Taliban, we think of Al-Qaeda, and we think of ISIS. And now going back and saying, okay, why does this group exist? Where did they come from? And what responsibility does the United States have in this? I think is the biggest question, as historians that we can ask today, do we hold any responsibility for having created and armed and trained groups that we're now having to fight back against, and who now really hold a very strong anti-American, anti-Westernized viewpoint. So that's kind of the war in Afghanistan. So we've been there again, 2001 until today. We have many times under Obama, under Trump, said that we are going to pull out our forces from Afghanistan. The goal, I think, right now of us being there is to keep stability in the government and keep the Taliban kind of at bay. Maybe they won't behave so badly if they know that we're just right next door in the country. I'd say probably the most interesting thing to have happened in any of this recently was, for the very first time ever, the leader of the Taliban decided to sit down in official talks with the United States and the United Nations to try to negotiate some sort of peace, and encouraging them to become part of the official government in Afghanistan. And I think the hope is that once they agree to kind of follow the rules to where we can talk with them in, UN meetings, that we will pull everyone out of Afghanistan. So I think right now, I should double check. I think right now there's 13,000 American soldiers in Afghanistan, and at the peak, I think 200,000. So that has been the war in Afghanistan in 20 minutes. So, well done, guys. Please answer the questions. Email me if you have any questions at all.